Golden light drips between marble columns, reflecting off the floor mosaics, as if the sun itself had slipped into the city. There is no silence in Rome, only a constant symphony of hurried footsteps, cartwheels on stone, and voices arguing about fish, bread, and politics, as if it were all a single, confusing currency of exchange. The air smells of wood smoke, human sweat, and fermented fish. The mixture is strong, unstable, almost emotional. You newly arrive from a time where refrigerators exist, are in the olfactory crosshairs of an empire that has never heard of modern preservation. The dominant aroma doesn't come from bakeries or vegetable gardens. It comes from open amphorae, packed with garum rotten fish sauce left to ferment in the sun for days or weeks. To the Romans, it's liquid gold. To you, it's a sensory challenge with philosophical implications. But don't feel special. Not even a senator would escape this aromatic cloud. In Rome, food is politics, spectacle, a tool of distinction and domination. Eating is not just an act of survival, it's a parade of status, a cultural manifesto served between silver platters and embroidered cloths. There, in the city center, a thermopolium, the ancient version of a fast food joint, bubbles with activity. Masons and scribes jostle to buy steaming bowls of lentils, fish with bread, and watered-down wine. No luxury here, just hot sustenance for a few sesterces. In the back, a woman turns skewers over coals, her eyes squinting from the heat. There's something heroic and tragic in this daily gesture. On the other end of the city, where gardens are neatly trimmed and names carry pedigree, a senatorial house prepares for a convivium, a dinner. Slaves glide between columns with trays of figs, cheeses seasoned with herbs from the east, and small birds roasted whole, still with their beaks. The host is worried. Did enough saffron arrive from Carthage? Is the wine too sweet? Does the philosopher come in to speak on stoic virtue like dates, or hate them? As the guests recline on tricliniums posing under linen blankets, something peculiar is revealed. They don't eat out of hunger, they eat for narrative. Each dish is a speech, each spice, a political map. The empire eats the world, chews borders, swallows distant flavors. From Egypt come dates. From Syria, cinnamon. From Germania, nothing, because the Germans are barbarians, and their palate, it seems, is limited to roots and insults. The Roman elite developed a taste that despises the simple and venerates the strange. The more exotic the ingredient, the more social respect it commands. The common is for others. You, now an eyewitness to opulence, notice that no one is truly savoring the food. There is something rehearsed in their gestures, something hollow in their eyes. The banquet is a ritual, and like all rituals, it obeys invisible and absurd rules. A mistake in the toast could cost a friendship. A poorly timed burp could be seen as betrayal. And the most interesting part, despite all this pomp, the Romans don't have cutlery as you know it. They eat with their fingers, with bread, with the occasional spoon. The knife is a kitchen tool, not a table utensil. There's an unexpected honesty in this primitive gesture, as if, deep down, even surrounded by gold and mosaics, they still know that eating is an act of survival, not spectacle. The incense smoke mixes with the aroma of roast meat. Music begins, timidly, with a Nubian slave plucking a cithara. Someone talks about Cato, another about the price of pepper. You don't understand all the names, but you understand the feeling. This is a civilization that chews the world with sharp teeth and spits out what it doesn't understand. If you're offered a bit of garum, smile, accept. It's safer not to offend someone's taste. And after all, who are you to judge an empire by its smell? Night falls over Rome. The columns cast long shadows over alleys and markets. An amphora is opened with a wet pop. The smell spreads again. And for the first time, perhaps, you notice something familiar in the strangeness. And if you feel this dive is stirring more than sleep, well, it might be worth leaving a comment. Who knows, maybe you too would have the courage to taste the sacred sauce of the Caesars. Moonlight touches the marble with cold fingers. An olive tree sways gently in the wind, a faint clinking of glasses. the meal goes on. The first surprise is the absence. There are no kitchens as you know them. No built-in ovens. No four-burner stoves with a little button that lights with a click. Instead, the Roman kitchen pulses between portable braziers, tilted amphorae, and soot-blackened pots. A spectacle of inventiveness, seasoned with ashes, and of course, with lots of garum. In humbler homes, cooking indoors is a risk of fire, of poisoning, of suffocation. So many don't even try. Food comes ready from the streets, from thermopolia, scattered like freckles across the urban skin of Rome. These are small stone counters, with built-in containers where broths, stews, and warm wines simmer. The smell escapes from clay lids like inviting whispers. Come, eat, forget you can't afford rent. Curiously, this semi-industrial setup is no shame. Eating out is common, practical, even stylish. The thermopolium on the Via della Bendanza, for example, still preserved in Pompeii, reveals not only its food function, but also its aesthetic. Walls painted with scenes of banquets, advertisements of popular dishes, and that marble counter stained with use, as if telling stories in layers of grease. But in wealthy homes, the kitchen is a theater of smoke and silence. Located in the back, far from the delicate eyes of the patricians, it houses the controlled chaos of the coquus, the head cook, and his legion of helpers. None of them eat what they prepare. None of them have a say in the menu. They simply obey. The embers are kept alive like demanding gods, always ready to reheat flamingo tongue soup, or fry a piece of lamb brain in Cretan olive oil. Yes, flamingo. It was considered fancy. The taste, no one knows for sure. Some say it resembles duck, but that may just be retroactive vanity. The academic truth about the flavor of Roman flamingo remains uncertain, thankfully. Meanwhile, the oven, when it exists, is a hole of clay and stone, fed with wood, heat, and faith. The bread, flat and marked with pre-cut divisions, is baked directly on the inner wall, as if the food and the structure were part of the same architecture. And in a way, they are. Everything in ancient Rome seems built to both endure and crumble at the same time. Among terracotta bowls and iron skewers, there are also bronze pots, long spoons, stone mortar for grinding seeds, leaves, small roots. Flavor, after all, doesn't come from the flame, but from alchemy. The mix is the soul of the Roman recipe. Honey with vinegar, fish with fruit, meat with mint sauce. There is no fear of contrast, only the desire to surprise. The tongue must bow before creativity. On the kitchen walls hang dried herbs, pieces of cured meat, garlic braided into crowns, as if the pantry itself had a religious vocation. And maybe it does. Eating is almost a cult. Each ingredient carries symbolic valuement to cleanse the palate: cumin for luck, laurel to ward off evil. Between one dish and another emerges the figure of the Kalina, the name of the kitchen, a feminine word, of course. Because here, the empire surrenders to the invisible strength of women and slaves. They are the true chefs, though. They're never called that. Their faces aren't on coins. Their names don't make it into poems. But their hands are on everything that's served. There are records of cooks specialized in single dishes. One knew the exact doneness of goose liver. Another mastered the art of making oyster PTS. And if foie gras scandalizes today for its origins, imagine in Rome, where even sea urchin was treated as an erotic delicacy. The day ends with banquet leftovers being collected in silence. The smell of charcoal mingles with that of oxidized wine. A knife is washed with vinegar. Firewood is stacked carefully, as if tomorrow the fire, too, had a reputation to uphold. Through the kitchen window, one sees the courtyard lit by torches. A slave carries empty bowls back to the atrium. He passes an old olive tree, crooked, resilient. The same olive tree from the night before. The same shadow swaying over the stone floor. The same distant murmur of Rome, which never sleeps, only dozes between one dish and another. A grain of pepper crosses deserts, oceans, tax-infested ports, and pothole-ridden roads, only to arrive on the plate of a Roman who likely has no idea where it came from, but he knows it's expensive, and that's enough. Food in Rome is a map. Each spice a line drawn between worlds. Saffron from Hispania, ginger from India, nutmeg from mysterious regions where the sun seems bigger and the sky stickier. Everything arrives in amphorae, sacks, baskets, and promises. Trade routes are like invisible nerves, linking Rome to what it doesn't understand, but longs to possess. Eating becomes a way to dominate the world, without leaving the armchair, or rather, the triclinium. The caravans that cross the Syrian desert carry more than fabrics and pigments. They carry flavors that will soon drip over birds, seep into honey cakes, perfume wines that were already too sweet. It's a sensory theater, and the spices are the silent protagonists. At the patrician's table, one doesn't say this is tasty. One says this is from the East. Origin is the validation. Flavor, a bonus. But don't be fooled into thinking everything was refined. Excess was the norm. The combinations, audacious. Can you imagine a fish pie with raisins, pepper, cumin, and honey? The Romans did, and they made it, and called it art. Some archaeologists claimed the Roman palate was addicted to the sweet enzor, the pungent, the indecipherable. Others disagree. And even today, no one seems to agree whether there was a dominant Roman taste. Academic uncertainty persists, stuck like a mule on a narrow road. At large feasts, exotic ingredients are announced as part of the spectacle. This duck was seasoned with cardamom from Arabia, as if the cardamom brought with it the desert sand, the story of the camel that carried it, and the longing of the merchant who traded it. Eating becomes a short trip through distant lands, with layovers in every bite. The most revered spice, however, is pepper, simple, black, granulated, so valued that there are records of soldiers being paid with it. A handful could be worth an animal. At times, it was worth nearly as much as gold. And the most ironic part, it wasn't used to mask spoiled food, as many still repeat. That's a myth. The truth. The Romans genuinely loved intensity. The bite on the tongue, the sweat food provoked. And then there's saffron. Not the turmeric that today colors risottos without ceremony, but crocus sativus, delicate, almost ethereal. The Romans used it to season, perfume, heal, and adorn theaters. Yes. At festivals, a light saffron mist was released into the air to please the spectators. Imagining this gesture is like watching someone burn money just to see the smoke dance. At the other end of the pyramid, the common folk also knew imported flavors in diluted, adapted, falsified versions. A bit of reduced must, a touch of vinegar with local herbs, a handful of local seeds, dried and toasted. It wasn't luxury, but it was ingenious. Rome wasn't just unequal. It was creative at the margins. And who made these adaptations? Women, mainly. Those who cooked behind the scenes, who learned recipes by ear, who substituted ingredients as if tricking fate. They didn't import spices. They reinvented them. When the forum market closes at the end of the day, the smell of spices still lingers in the air like a soft echo. The ground, marked by the steps of merchants and buyers, seems to whisper the names of regions you only know from maps: Taprobana, Setica, Bactria. All of it cooked, reduced, boiled down into a thick sauce over today's meat. The moon, once again, rises over the city. The pigeons perch on red tiles. And a salty breeze brings the scent of freshly baked bread mixed with something you've almost learned to accept: the persistent smell of garum. There are things that move empires: ambition, conquests, the need to eternalize one's name in marble, and curiously, fermented fish sauce. Garum is not just a condiment. It's a declaration of intent. A smell that arrives before the food, even before hunger. It crosses the narrow streets of Rome like a salty ghost, suggesting that there, in that poorly sealed amphora, lies the true power of the imperial palate. Produced with fish entrails left in the sun, mixed with salt and thyme. Garum was the kind of thing made far from sight and, even farther from the nose. In coastal factories, called garumaria, dozens of slaves stirred stone tanks full of viscera. The process took weeks. The result, an amber, viscous liquid, oozed from the residue like a suspicious elixir. The smell was ... strong. The neighborhood, unhappy, and yet it was coveted. The most expensive garum came from Carthago Nova in Hispania, and was known as garum sanctorum. It was served at banquets with the same reverence as a rare wine, poured sparingly over oysters, cooked vegetables, grilled meats, and even desserts. Yes, some would drizzle a few drops over fruit. Are there limits? Probably. But the Romans rarely respected them. Pliny, the Elder, in his encyclopedic obsession, described garum as an aphrodisiac, a digestive tonic, an almost sacred balm. Some doubt it. And some believe Pliny never had the courage to smell a freshly opened tank. Uncertainty lingers like a salty cloud over the naturalist's legacy. The garum trade was so lucrative that there are records of senators secretly investing in the factories. Not officially, of course. After all, dealing with rotting fish didn't match the purple toga. But when profit drips from the amphora like marine honey, principles evaporate. A typical garum amphora came sealed with wax and marked with symbols: origin, fish type, degree of fermentation. It was, essentially, a gourmet label. There was garum made from tuna, mackerel, eel, and a rarer one, made with roe. The taste, hard to describe. Salty, yes. But also umami, that flavor we now associate with soy sauce, but which the Romans mastered before they even understood the concept. They just knew that with garum, everything became more interesting, or at least more intense. Curiously, the sauce was also medicine. Applied to bites, wounds, even as diluted eye drops, though that sounds more like a bad joke. Some texts suggest garum, mixed with hot wine, cured hangovers. Others claimed it only made them worse. The doctors of the time disagreed as much as modern ones do. In daily life, garum was diluted, mixed with honey, vinegar, herbs, creating versions for every budget. It was the ketchup, the soy sauce, the broth cube, and the perfume of an empire, all in one questionably sourced liquid, and Rome, of course, loved it. Loved it so much that fragments of garum amphorae have been found in rural villas, military forts, shipwrecks. Wherever there was Rome, there was the smell of fermented fish. And where there was smell, there was also a story of trade, desire, and slight nasal discomfort. On a street corner in Pompeii, near the Forum, there's a wall painting showing a slave serving garum, with an almost ceremonial gesture. The amphora is tilted with elegance, the spoon raised like an offering. No one is smiling. Eating, for the Romans, was a serious matter. The sun sets over the dusty rooftops. A merchant closes his spice shop, locks the door with an iron bar, grabs an amphora by the handle, and walks down the alley. The amber liquid swaying like a silent bell. On the ground, an olive tree casts its shadow with twisted fingers. The same trunk, the same silence, the same smell, persistent, as if the city itself had been seasoned with garum. Hunger is not a prerequisite. Appetite, in Rome, is a matter of posture, and the posture is reclined. One does not sit to dine. That would be rude, vulgar, plebeian. Instead, one lounges on thick cushions, in calculated angles of laziness and elegance. Elbows support the body, hands drift among trays, and the gaze always half-lidded observes others with that mix of boredom and judgment so characteristic of the Roman elite. Eating while lying down is, above all, an exercise in horizontal superiority. You settle in, or try to. The triclinium, the name given to the arrangement of 3 couches around a low table, was designed for soft conversations, shared dishes, and suggestive glances. The idea is to eat little, for a long time. But in practice, it slips into excess with disconcerting ease. After all, moderation was never exactly a pillar of imperial culture. The meal begins light: eggs, olives, fresh cheeses, but it soon spirals into absurd displays of ostentation. Dishes that resemble culinary riddles, hair covered with peacock feathers, pigs stuffed with birds, stuffed with fish, stuffed with eggs. A kind of edible matryoshka, meant to prove that yes, it's possible, and no, no one needed it. The host, usually a senator, a failed philosopher, or a nouveau rich, desperate for legitimacy, watches his guests like a general surveys his troops. Each dish served is a move on the social chessboard. Each compliment to the seasoning, a symbolic coin. And God help the one who refuses a delicacy without a convincing medical excuse. Burping, curiously, is acceptable. Some say it's a sign of appreciation, others that it's inevitable. The Roman banquet is long, heavy, and strategically chaotic. There are pauses for music, poetic recitations, juggling acts, and debates on whether the world is made of atoms or for basic elements. You chew a fig while listening to a theory about the soul, and you understand the fig more than the philosopher. Between courses, hands are washed with scented waters. One slave pours the liquid into silver pitchers, while another offers small embroidered cloths. The gesture is of contradictory delicacy, considering you just ate raw goose liver with honey sauce. The most extravagant banquets, like those of Lucullus, become legends. It is said he once prepared a dinner for himself, with the same pomp as a feast for 20, justifying, tonight, Lucullus dines with Lucullus. The line between pride and delusion was thin and well decorated. In response to this kind of gustatory reverie, laws were created. The Lex Vania, for example, tried to restrict the number of guests and the cost of banquets. A legislative attempt to belt a civilization that dined with its pants unbuttoned. It didn't work. Like every rule that meddles with the stomach, it was widely ignored. Wine, of course, is never absent, but it must be diluted. Drinking it pure is barbaric. It's mixed with water, honey, herbs, even flowers. Some recipes include pepper, others, powdered marble. The point isn't the taste, it's the sensation. And the sensation must be subtle, warm, slightly numbing. Outside, the city carries on. In the dark, merchants close their stalls. A woman sings while sweeping the tavern floor. A dog barks at the moon. Inside, in the diffuse heat of torches and reclining bodies, the last dates are served with a pinch of salt, for contrast. The conversation is quieter now. Sleep begins to weigh. One guest dozes off. Another philosophizes about time. The table still holds the remains of the banquet, but no one dares to get up. Not because they can't, but because standing would declare the end of something that perhaps never properly began. Between the cushions, a distracted hand caresses a crust of bread. The same olive tree sways outside. The wind enters through the window, with the scent of anise and warm meat. The city breathes slowly, like someone about to turn over. The aroma of fresh bread floats through the air like a whisper of protection. In ancient Rome, food is not just sustenance. It is a sacred language, a bridge between the human and the divine, a small pact between the stomach and the gods. Bread, wine, milk, they are not mere ingredients, but symbols, laden with meaning and superstition. Bread, for example, is not only the food of the poor or weary soldiers. It is offered to the household gods, to the ancestors, to the invisible spirits that guard the family. If a piece falls to the ground, it is not stepped on. That would be an offense. That bread may have been touched by the Lares, and punishment might come in the form of a restless night or an unexpected fever. Wine, the inseparable partner of the Roman table, also has its rituals. It is never served without a silent invitation to the gods of Olympus and of shadows, to the nymphs, to the forgotten figures of the forests. Mixed with herbs, sometimes even with a touch of salt water, wine is part of a daily ceremony, small, discreet, but essential. Curiously, the Romans believed in almost miraculous properties of foods that today you might find strange. Onion, for example. It wasn't just a seasoning. It was a cure for rabid dog bites. Yes, bites. Picture the scene. A desperate man, bitten by a furious dog, rubbing onions on the wound while praying for the city to remain in peace. And it doesn't stop there. Garlic was used to ward off evil spirits, protect soldiers, and ensure peaceful dreams. But its smell, they said, could also repel less devoted friends and lovers, a side effect worthy of ancient magic. Inside homes, domestic altars, the Lares always keep a small stock of sacred foods, grains, olive oil, a bit of honey. These are offerings to maintain good luck, keep misfortune at bay, and ensure the oven doesn't fail when it's time to bake bread. A failed loaf could be seen as a sign of divine displeasure and result in small penances. Food superstitions were as diverse as the dishes they served. Some believed that eating certain fish on specific days brought bad luck. Others avoided certain vegetables to ward off envy. Academic uncertainty about the details of these beliefs remains thick. The records are fragmented. Practices varied from region to region, and even the emperor could contradict them in a sigh of arrogance. On the street, a fruit vendor murmurs strange words while stacking figs. A child collects coins near the temple of Vesta, where the sacred fire must never go out, under penalty of disaster. In the kitchen, a slave prepares a special bread, mixed with fennel seeds, destined for a ritual no one quite remembers but which is still performed with blind faith. And the curious thing is that, amid all the pomp, sacred food is essentially the same as what you'd find on the common table. The difference lies in intention, in reverence, in the slow gesture of offering, of giving thanks, of asking for protection against the invisible. Outside, the olive tree sways again. Its elongated shadow seems to carry secrets older than the empire itself. A respectful silence envelops the courtyard as night falls with the softness of freshly baked bread, warm and tender, ready to be broken. And so, between the sacred and the everyday, ancient Rome chews not only its food, but also its beliefs, its fears, and its small daily miracles. Behind the pomp and perfume of Roman feasts, the true alchemy happens in the shadows of the Colina, the kitchen, governed by invisible hands. Women and slaves are the silent maestros of this spectacle, though their names are rarely inscribed in stone or celebrated in verse. Free women, especially matrons, supervise the food logistics with an iron gaze. They choose the ingredients, dictate the menu, approve or discard recipes. But rarely do they get their hands dirty. That task falls to the cooks, who are often enslaved or freedwomen, specialists who know every combination capable of turning a simple stew into a feast for the senses. The kokwis, the head cook, is usually a slave or a trained freedman. His position is ambiguous, powerful within the kitchen, invisible outside it. The hierarchy there is strict, marked by a constant dance between fear and respect. The archimagirist, the master of cooks, holds almost secret knowledge, passed down orally, guarded like treasure. In the kitchens, the smell of smoke mixes with crushed spices and roasted meat. There is a silent ritual in every gesture, choosing the right wood so the fire doesn't taste bitter. The exact timing to turn a bird, the proper way to grind herbs without losing aroma. It's a science and an art, developed in the shadow of official history. Curiously, some slave cooks achieved fame among patricians for their miraculous recipes of liver pitié, a secret sauce, a pie no one could replicate. But their names, those were forgotten, buried under mountains of wine, ampery, and poems dedicated to emperors. What is known, however, is that these cooks were masters of improvisation. If an ingredient was missing, they invented substitutes, created unexpected blends, saved the banquet from catastrophe with a bit of vinegar and honey. Creativity was their sharpest weapon. And while senators toasted and philosophized about virtue, these women and slaves did the real hard work, ensuring the food arrived hot, flavorful, and in sufficient quantity to impress without causing a collective stomach collapse. No easy feat. There's a little-known curiosity. Some enslaved women became so indispensable they gained status within the household, receiving freedom or even indirect political influence. Still, the line between servitude and power was thin, often crossed with fear and silence. That day, as the sun set over the city, an old quiet cook tossed the last embers into the fire. She didn't watch the banquet, nor did she take part in the guests' speeches. But if one could hear the whisper of the fire, it would tell her stories. Outside, the aging olive tree cast its familiar shadow on the ground. And the world kept turning, slowly between pots, spices, and the eternal struggle between visibility and anonymity. Because in the end, Rome is made more by those who serve than by those who feast. The image that likely comes to mind is of a muscular, sweaty man, drenched in blood and ready to devour an entire boar after hours in the arena. But brace yourself for the shock. The diet of gladiators was, in fact, quite, vegetarian. Yes, that's right. Among the men trained for battle and spectacle, barley bread was king. Thick, heavy, simple. It nourished like few other foods could, providing the energy needed to endure grueling days of training and combat. Protein, minimal. Iron came more from the earth and roots than from meat. For gladiators, food was almost a disciplinary regimen. Many were called hordery, literally barley eaters. They drank a curious beverage, a mixture of plant ashes and herbs, dissolved in water, to aid bone recovery. A kind of ancient supplement, part absurd, part ingenious. And why this diet? Because meat was expensive, and while gladiators were valuable, they couldn't cost a fortune to feed. Moreover, modern studies suggest that excessive meat consumption could slow them down, or make them more prone to injury. Barley provided energy, endurance, and perhaps a bit of resistance to the brutal wear of arena life. Curiously, the idea that gladiators ate a lot of meat came from popular imagination, likely fueled by films and more recent myths. The truth is, if they had indulgences, they came in the form of dried fruits, nuts, and an obsession with bread, the carbohydrate of antiquity. And while you imagine this austere diet, it's worth remembering that gladiators were celebrities, and at times pampered. They received gifts, had access to advanced medical care for the era, and took part in rituals that blended sacrifice, spectacle, and propaganda. The arena, a stage of blood and glory, was also a place where discipline began in the kitchen. And that discipline showed that even in brutality, there was method, calculation. A delicate balance between strength and endurance. Outside the arena, in the city, the smell of fresh bread mingles with that of spices. The same olive tree as always sways its leaves in the afternoon breeze, a silent witness to a Rome where even the fiercest combatants rely on simplicity to survive. The sun sets, the torches are lit, and barley is distributed not as punishment, but as an ancestral secret of resilience. Who would have thought the key to taming the beast lies in something as modest as a rustic loaf of bread? Rome is a banquet of extremes. On one side, the lavish table of the senator, who judges the world between a sip of wine and a bite of pheasant. On the other, the shallow plate of the plebeian, who makes do with a hard piece of bread and a bowl of lentils. The contrast is brutal, and food, more than any speech, reveals the social fissure that drives the empire. For the wealthy, the banquet is spectacle. Luxury is a form of power, a nonverbal language that says, I can eat this, you cannot. The pursuit of the exotic is obsessive. Ostrich eggs, flamingo, peacock tongue, perfumed vinegar. There's no shortage of stories, some true. Others invented about dishes that took days to prepare and minutes to devour. Meanwhile, the people live on another frequency. The staple food is pools, a porridge made from barley or wheat flour, simple and robust. It sustains, but it doesn't delight. The markets overflow, but access is unequal. Bread is essential, and there are even records that the state distributed it for free or subsidized its production to prevent revolts. The infamous annona was not just social aid, but a political control system. A curious and almost poetic tale is the existence of the placenta, a kind of primitive pizza made with layers of dough, cheese, and honey, rolled and baked. It wasn't common on popular tables, but appeared during religious festivals and special occasions. A glimpse of abundance amid austerity. While the elite drank fine perfumed wines, the plebeian mixed what was available. Water, a bit of watered-down wine, herbs, The taste, unlikely to please, but a matter of survival. Hunger shaped the palate as much as status. Even so, there were moments of unity through food. Public festivals, religious celebrations, political events where food was distributed in public squares. In these cases, food is less about flavor and more about belonging, about being part of the city that never sleeps. Historians still debate whether these dietary differences contributed to the decline of the empire, or if they were simply inevitable reflections of such an unequal society. The answer, as always, is embarrassingly uncertain. As the city sleeps, one last vision. The shadow of the old olive tree dances across the ground, dividing equally the light and the darkness. Abundance and hunger, in a choreography that Rome cannot or does not want to change. And the city sighs, between a piece of bread and a cup of wine, ready to begin it all over again. The sun rises slowly over the Palatine Hill, bathing Rome in a light that seems to carry centuries of stories and scents. The city you know as a chaotic tangle of stones, voices and smoke did not emerge from nothing, much less its kitchen. Everything now spread across tables, triclinia, and thermopolia came from a slow mix of peoples, cultures, conquests, and improvisations. Rome wasn't cooked in a day. It was cooked in many. Look to the origins. The Etruscans, those mysterious northern neighbors, were masters in the art of cultivating vines and olives, and introduced meat smoking and curing techniques that would shape Roman recipes for centuries. If today you enjoy a good wine or a cured cheese, you owe a silent thanks to these enigmatic predecessors, whose culinary rituals blended religion and revelry. But Rome wasn't content to copy. It took, mixed, reinvented. The Greek influence, which arrived with trade and territorial expansion, brought a passion for vegetables, aromatic oils, and dishes that flirted with the philosophy of pleasure. And moderation, though, the latter was more theoretical than practical. The Greeks also introduced the concept of the symposium, the banquet that was also a lecture, a debate, a celebration of friendship. Eating was elevated to a social ritual with rules and performances. Something the Romans absorbed, but seasoned with their own dose of theatricality and excess. Let's not forget Egypt, with its golden grains, its dates sweet as sin, and the fermentation techniques that helped popularize lighter breads and aromatic wines. With each new province conquered, Rome didn't just take territory, it assimilated ingredients, customs, recipes, all to strengthen its gastronomic pulse. There's also Africa, the cradle of spices that ignited Roman palates. And India, with its pungent flavors, arriving via the Silk Road, a complex web of merchants, animals, and stories. These foreign ingredients were liquid gold in the hands of cooks, able to transform simple dishes into spectacles of aroma and texture. But expansion also brought challenges. The empire grew so vast that maintaining food quality became a logistical puzzle. Routes stretched, costs rose, and pepper didn't always arrive fresh. Roman globalization, so to speak, was seasoned with delays, fraud, and adaptations. Sometimes, what was supposed to be Indian saffron was just local saffron dyed a deeper yellow. Roman cuisine is, therefore, an incomplete recipe book, full of marginal notes, rushed corrections, and many doubts. The Roman cuisine we know today is a reconstruction made from archaeological fragments, scattered texts, and a great deal of imagination. An academic uncertainty that dances between science and fiction. And yet, this cultural cauldron created unique flavors. The blend of Etruscan techniques, Greek ingredients, Eastern spices, and Roman pragmatism gave rise to dishes that still influence Mediterranean cuisine today. That rustic bread, the bold sauce, the near-obsessive use of olive oil, are distant echoes of this messy past. But there's a near-melancholic beauty in this process. Rome, with all its glory and decay, wasn't cooked in a day, and it never stopped cooking. Each generation added, altered, forgot, and rediscovered ingredients and techniques. An eternal unfinished project, served on tables that are never empty for long. As the sun sets, The shadow of the ancient olive tree stretches across the courtyard. The smell of burning wood mingles with the sweet scent of honey, and the persistent saltiness of garum. A Roman evening begins to unfold, like so many others, among whispered stories. Distant flute notes, and the soft noise of diners chewing more than food they chew on time, culture, and memory. And there, among millennia-old stones and loaded silences, the story continues slow and unending, like a dish that never fully arrives at the table, but is never done being prepared. Wine in Rome is not just a drink. It is a companion, a diplomat, a remedy, and sometimes a problem disguised as a solution. The Roman liquid logic is simple. Nothing is drunk to pure. Nothing is drunk to alone. Wine was always diluted with water. Pure wine was for barbarians, or for those trying to prove they were beyond civilization. Imagine wine mixed with salt water, bitter herbs, honey, flowers, and even pepper. Each combination was a social and gustatory experiment. Soldiers, for instance, carried a drink called posca, made of vinegar, diluted in water and acidic mix, that besides hydrating, served to kill germs, a kind of medicinal alcohol, without glamour, but essential. This obsession with sourness, perhaps, stems from the Roman love of contrast and flavor intensity. Vinegar wasn't a villain, but a fundamental ingredient. A sauce for meats, a dressing for salads, a trick to liven up lukewarm soups. It was the invisible soul that made the simplest dish intriguing. But there were excesses. Imperial feasts, where wine flowed without limits, created embarrassing and, sometimes tragic situations for guests, who, in their drunkenness, lost their composure and control. The historian Tacitus mentions parties where senators fainted, orators fumbled, and poems were recited with trembling voices. Curiously, the Romans believed aged wine was the best stand. They were right, most of the time. But few could afford the luxury of rare wines. Most of the population drank younger, watered down, less flavorful versions that still fulfilled their social role. There are reports that some bizarre mixtures were considered aphrodisiacs: wine with honey and spices, vinegar with exotic herbs. The line between pleasure, medicine, and superstition was thin and quite blurred. And as you might imagine, excessive drinking had consequences beyond hangovers, disputes, betrayals, banquet accidents, and even political decisions made under the influence of alcohol. But that, too, was part of the feast or the tragedy. At the end of the night, the smell of wine mixed with incense and torch smoke spreads through the streets. The old olive tree sways its leaves with the ease of one who knows the party will start again tomorrow, and the wine will be poured once more, diluted and mixed, like a ritual that never ends. A silent toast to the liquid that warms and confuses, that cradles stories and dreams of others yet to be told. Because in Rome, as in every great city, wine is never just wine. Haste is an old friend of man, and in Rome it found its own way to manifest in the culinary field. While in patrician homes, food was a slow, pomp-filled ritual. On the streets pulsed a different rhythm, the fast pace of urban life, of commerce, of the need to feed the body quickly, to return to work or business. The thermopolio, the fast food stalls of ancient Rome, are the rustic equivalent of modern diners. Scattered throughout the city, especially in Pompeii, they offered steaming bowls, hot bread, and strong sauces for plebeians, workers, and even tourists of that era. It was food ready to be eaten, standing up, food for those who couldn't wait. Imagine a narrow, dirty street, filled with the smell of roasted meat and herbs. Behind the counter, a woman or a slave stirs large clay pots, while a customer elbows in to grab his bowl of lentils with bread. The price is affordable, the environment noisy, and the food simple, but comforting. This food was direct, no frills, often repetitive. A thick soup, some kind of stew, hard bread, maybe a piece of cheese. Variety wasn't the focus, speed was. The ritual of sitting at the table could wait, but hunger could not. And even more curious, Pompeii, the city frozen in time by Vesuvius, had more thermopolia than houses with kitchens. That says a lot about Roman urban life. Cooking at home wasn't a priority, or even a possibility for many. Eating out was the norm. It wasn't just about necessity, but also about sociability. Street stalls were meeting points, spaces for quick conversation, deals closed between bites. A fish sandwich, a bowl of hot soup, a dose of watered-down Wendy's were the foods of haste, of the city that never slowed down. But of course, not everything was healthy. Hygiene was precarious, and reports point to illnesses caused by poorly preserved or contaminated food. Still, street food endured, driven by demand and popular taste. Amid all this, garum remained omnipresent. Whether you were in a palace or on the street, fermented fish was their seasoning, perfuming, challenging the nose, and conquering the palate. At dusk, the smell of fire smoke mingles with the aroma of fresh bread and spilled wine from broken amphorae. The same ancient olive tree sways its leaves under the orange-streaked sky, a silent witness to a city that feeds and reinvents itself every moment. And so Rome continues, between the luxury of villas and the simplicity of stalls, between the banquet and the hard bread, between the past and eternity. In a civilization where excess is almost an Olympic sport, trying to control what goes on the plate is a task worthy of Hercules and, probably more painful. Rome, with its taste for opulence and ostentation, saw its lawmakers attempt, with variations and nuances, to impose limits on gluttony and luxury, mainly because food had become a currency of power and a symbol of status. The laws Lex Orcia, Lex Fania, and Lex Didia are classic examples of this regulatory attempt. They sought to restrict the number of guests, the cost of banquets, and even the types of ingredients used. Imagine the difficulty of monitoring who was really using flamingo or powdered gold in desert hand, how Romans loved to bend the rules. Lex Fania, for instance, limited spending on feasts, aiming to contain the parade of extravagance that drained public coffers and inflated egos. But the result was a sort of cat-and-mouse game, where hosts threw smaller parties that were still excessive, or used loopholes to impress with less. In practice, the elite found creative ways to continue showcasing wealth. More sophisticated dishes, artistic presentations, hand-picked guests. Because in ancient Rome, a banquet was less about eating and more about showing who you were, who you wanted to be. There was also a moral component. Overspending on food was seen as a sign of decadence and vanity, especially when poverty was visible just a few steps away. Philosophers and moralists criticized luxury as a mark of civilizational weakness, but their voices were often drowned out by the sound of clinking glasses and ringing dishes. The irony is that, while laws against luxury were debated, food was used as a political weapon. A banquet could be an act of generosity or manipulation. Distributing food meant distributing power, and refusing an invitation to dine could mean social isolation or even danger. And of course, no one really knew where the line was between necessity and excess. What to one was decadence, to another was culture. The line was always thin, shifting, and sometimes invisible. At the end of the day, the streets cool, the thermopolia close, and the smell of garum fills the air, indifferent to human laws. The old olive tree casts its long shadow, a silent witness to the Roman attempts to control what inevitably escapes control: appetite. And while the wine is stored and the lamps go out, the city prepares for another cycle of excess, desire, and transgression. Because deep down, Rome knows that the true law is that of hunger, and it does not surrender easily. Rome, once the beating heart of an empire that stretched like an eternal shadow over the Mediterranean, now walks through the twilight of its own history. The grandeur of banquets that once filled halls of gold and marble gives way to ever simpler tables, marked by the wear of time, the weight of the days, and the inevitable change of winds that have blown over the empire. You find yourself in the midst of this scene, where food is no longer just sustenance or ostentation, but memory and resilience. There's a different smell in the air: less garum, less incense, more fine smoke from hearths and hard bread. Barbarian invasions come from without and within, a slow unraveling of what once seemed unbreakable. The security of trade routes that brought spices and fine wines is compromised. The amphorae that once traveled thousands of kilometers now move at an uncertain pace, in leaky barges, or disappear into the depths of turbulent seas, and the ingredients change. The luxury of exotic meats gives way to the bitter simplicity of roots and grain. Bread, once a supporting actor, becomes the centerpiece of the table-heart rustic, chewed with almost reverent attention. Honey reappears as the only reliable sweet, a liquid memory of better times, a golden echo of banquets that once seemed endless. Wine, which accompanied Rome through all its phases, suffers its own decline. No longer is it served diluted with the same pomp and ritual. It becomes a luxury reserved for the few who can still keep. A glimmer in fragile goblets perhaps, now with a bit of sand at the bottom, a sign of haste or neglect in production. The common drink becomes a mix of water, local fruits, and herbs, where the alcohol is less important than the warmth it brings to tired bodies. Meanwhile, the ever-present smell of smoke that once perfumed aristocratic kitchens now fills common homes, a sign of fires cooking simple meals, made with what is found, not with what is desired. In many regions of the empire, basic foods like lentils, barley, and native vegetables replace the once celebrated delicacies in a dance of adaptation and survival. What was once a celebration is now a memory. The great convivia, where politics, philosophy, and virtue were debated between bites of meat and sips of wine, give way to modest, quiet dinners, where every bite is a victory against scarcity and fear. It is Rome's Last Supper, not marked by noisy feasts, but by a tacit understanding of the fragility of existence. The food culture that so deeply influenced the Mediterranean world does not disappear, transforms. Many recipes, techniques, and flavors migrate into the future, adapting to new contexts and peoples. The use of olive oil, the love of bread, the combinations of herbs and spices resonate in dishes of centuries to come, an invisible legacy that keeps the past's flame alive. In the countryside, small farmers try to endure planting what the land still allows, gathering fruits, tending olive groves that seem as old as time itself. Olive oil, the golden liquid that once symbolized wealth and power, becomes a vital resource, consumed with care and affection, a symbol of continuity. In the city, where palaces begin to crumble and the streets bear the weight of years, food is less about pleasure and more about ritual. Sharing bread becomes an act of communion, an almost sacred gesture that unites survivors around a fragile table. Bread broken, wine shared, seeds saved for the next planting, small acts that resist decay. And the old olive tree, the same that witnessed so many banquets, so many excesses, and so many stories, sways its leaves in the evening breeze. Its deep roots penetrate ancient soil, firm like the memory it carries. The scent of its leaves mixes with the damp earth, the faint chimney smoke, and the sweet honey that still resists time. You sense, then, that despite all the decline, the story has not ended. It has simply changed tone. Like a dish that has been served, tasted, and now rests, leaving its final flavor on the tongue, ready to inspire new recipes, new gatherings, new stories. Rome does not end with a bang, but with a soft sigh, slow fade out, where the scent of bread, olive oil, and honey blends with the night air, lulling the city into a deep sleep, full of memories and invisible promises. And as the stars appear in the sky, silent witnesses to a world in transition, the shadow of the olive tree stretches out, making room for what is yet to come. Because Rome's Last Supper is not an end, but a passage, an invitation for the flavor of history to continue being tasted, reinvented, dreamed. The silence of the Roman night is a subtle tapestry, embroidered with the distant sound of hurried footsteps, the whisper of the old olive tree's leaves, and the soft echo of toasts in houses already asleep. It is a silence that demands nothing except that you surrender to the calm settling slowly, like twilight embracing the end of the day and the beginning of a dream. You nestle into this welcoming dusk, feeling the pleasant weight of laziness spreading through your body, while the stories of flavors, aromas, and ancient dishes weave through your mind like an invisible thread of shared memory. The Rome, you know, is not made only of stone, politics, and wars, but of scents still floating in the air, of whispered laughter between bites, of silences filled with meaning. Food, in this moment, becomes more than nourishment. It is a link between past and present, a delicate bridge spanning centuries to remind us of the humanity that binds us. Each spice, each loaf of bread, each sip of wine, is a chapter in a narrative still being told silently on tables, in kitchens, in streets, and in hearts. And as sleep approaches like an old friend in no hurry, the city breathes slowly, cradling dreams with the sweet perfume of honey, the persistent saltiness of garum, and the comforting softness of olive oil. These are aromas that soothe, that invite rest, that close the day's cycle with a silent promise. There will always be another banquet, another story, another night. The olive tree, silent guardian of the ages, still sways its leaves under the moon's gentle light. It witnesses, as always, the eternal cycle of flavors and memories, of excess and moderation, of past and future. And you, now wrapped in this mantle of tranquility, allow yourself to drift slowly into sleep, lulled by ancient voices still whispering between empty plates in quiet streets. May your dreams be seasoned with the lightness of Mediterranean aromas, and may your rest be as deep as the time that has passed, but never disappeared. The story of food, after all, is also the story of Menand. As long as there is a breath, a scent, a taste, it will remain alive. Good night.